Hello and welcome to the Unofficial Game Pass podcast with me, Connor Smith, and my good friend, my co-host, the mastermind, Odhrán Johnson.
Hello.
Each week we look at a game from Xbox Game Pass, we play it, we sort of review it, tell you what it's all about, whether you should play it, let us be your guide to the service that is Xbox Game Pass. This week we are looking at Resident Evil 7. Now, the way that we planned these episodes, we were going to look at Resident Evil 7 just before Resident Evil Village came out, but due to university commitments, the schedule has changed somewhat. So now that we're in the interesting position of looking at Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, after Village has come out, we can talk about Village itself, one of us having played it, one of us, I assume, just having seen it. And also when we come to do our next episode, perhaps, which is on Mass Effect, we can talk a little bit about the Legendary Edition. But this week we are looking at Resident Evil 7, which is still on Game Pass. And Odhrán, I want to start off with how well versed are you with the Resident Evil franchise? What was your first experience of it? How do you know of it before you jumped into this game?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting sort of question because I feel like it brought up an interesting topic this week, actually, because I was talking to a few people who perhaps hadn't played Resident Evil before at all. And it is always kind of talked about as like there's these sort of core games with regards to the gaming industry that are kind of considered mandatory for someone to play. Like you'll have your Halos. I suppose Call of Duty would fall into that. I don't think there's a specific one. Maybe Modern Warfare series might be in there. Sort of like some of the Sonic games, Mario, all that sort of stuff is kind of considered like the face of gaming. So you kind of need to have some semblance of knowledge of that. And Resident Evil would definitely be up there, given its long-standing history in the medium. But I had no experience with Resident Evil. I had seen people talk about it before, and I had like some knowledge of the really awful movies that were released for Resident Evil. And I picked up the Ori 2 remake on a Christmas sale, and I played, I think, 5 to 6 hours of it, and I kind of just left it then because I was, not that I got bored of it, but I again, like most of the time when I put down a game, it's because I just don't have the time. And then I'm one of those people as well that like I can't just come back to a game that's like 5 or 6 hours in. I kind of need to start again, and then that ends up putting me off. So then I end up just never playing it. So, I had no real prior knowledge about it, and I suppose probably picked the worst time to start it, given that the new game has come out. Like, and this is the first time I did a playthrough on my channel for like any game, because I think in some ways it was kind of to live up to your sort of sadistic impression of like how I go through games, and maybe they were proved right, to be honest, and maybe this was a good experience because I kind of felt like I went into this game and I didn't come out. I felt like I was able to predict when jump scares were coming in Resident Evil 7 by the end of it. But I had no previous experience to it beforehand. I don't know, are you the same with that? Because I know you got really big into it, because I remember I saw you get the book of all the Resident Evil history stuff. So I was kind of like, did this kind of just spark your interest in the whole series like Yakuza did, or was it different?
So when I was younger, I think I was aware of the Resident Evil games because I think I might have seen my brothers play them on like the original PlayStation, and like knowing that they were just absolutely like really scary for when they released, like, going through a mansion and like seeing the zombies. I was very aware of it being a scary horror game, and I think that my mum allowed me to watch the first Resident Evil film when I was about 6, which is a fun thing that I bring up and say, oh, you're such a bad mum. But actually, I don't think it was that bad. Well, the film, yeah, they're guilty pleasures. But really, I don't know. The first one might be all right, I guess. No, my first true proper experience of Resident Evil was Resident Evil 6, which I think I got like the collector's edition, because I have the steelbook. I have like a zombie hoodie with like Resident Evil 6 on it. And that game, I think it's probably the game that probably annoys the most kind of true Resident Evil fans, because it becomes more of like an action game by that point. They had about 6 different campaigns. It was like a huge story game. And the Leon's campaign in that game is, you know, kind of very zombie horror focused, and then as it goes on to the different campaigns, it's just like a completely over the top goofy action film sort of thing. But me, when I play that game, I loved that game. So I have like a lot of nostalgia and sentimentality attached to Resident Evil 6. People can say it's a shit game and departed from Resident Evil really like, but I'm always gonna have a soft spot for it. But when we decided to do Resident Evil 7 for the podcast, and because I was very interested in Resident Evil Village coming out, obviously we have a little bit of a drought of next gen games for Xbox particularly. So I was looking at the trailers for Village thinking, this looks amazing, I need to play 7. And 7 surprised me because it goes back to kind of the horror roots. I mean, since obviously getting interested in Resident Evil again, I've bought and played quite a few of them. I went back to the first one, the HD remake you can get now. So I know what it's like to go from room to room, scavenging, completing puzzles, interacting with all the items, that kind of very survival horror experience. I mean, it created that term. And Resident Evil 7 does a really good job of putting you in a first-person perspective, which is like a new thing for kind of mainline Resident Evil titles. And they recreate that sense of going around this cryptic environment, searching for items and not having enough tools to deal with the kind of threats of horror that you face. So yeah, I mean, that it's hard. Before we go any further, what was because I know you put on the camera, you filmed yourself on the playthrough. What was your first impressions, that first hour that you played when you turned on Resident Evil 7?
Yeah, the first hour, God, yeah, no, it seems like a while ago, even though I only played it like a week ago. I think it's kind of the nature of kind of doing. I think I actually feel like the way I played the game was a good way of playing games in general, because usually when I go into a game, I'll tend to like binge a load of it like over a couple of nights. And then it comes to like a week or two down the line, and then I've completely forgotten what I've played. Like, I think Red Dead Redemption 2 is a good example of that. Like, I've really good fond memories of certain elements of that, but like, I pumped about 60 hours into that game, and I think I remember like 2 or 3 scenes at max. But I did this sort of it was almost like I was watching a TV show when I did it, because I played an hour a night, and in some cases maybe an hour and a half. And I suppose that was partly by choice, and then the other part was because my camera has such a like low battery that I wouldn't be able to do any more. But my first impression of it was, I'm not sure if the full playthrough I do will be out by the time this comes out, but if you look at how I'm reacting in like the first episode as opposed to the last, like, you can tell that it feels like such a drastically different experience at times. Because the stuff you look at, I really love the idea of the puzzle elements. Like, that's something I've loved ever since I was younger. Like, I remember when I had my first ever laptop, like, I think one of the games I had on it was called Spooky Mansion or something. It was like one of those CD-ROM games you get. And it was very much point and click style, and you'd have to go around this mansion looking for stuff to solve puzzles, and you might find something in the bedroom that would be to open something in the living room or whatever. So I was very much at home in that sort of style, but I felt a lot of I got very much Outlast sort of vibes off it, especially at the beginning when you don't have any weapons. Because Outlast is probably one of my favorite horror games of all time. Like, I have a very good recollection of sitting down with my friends and playing that over the course of an entire day, and it was like a brilliant game. 2 not so much, but we don't need to get too much into that. What did I first think of Resident Evil 7? I thought, first of all, I think Ethan's an idiot. I don't think he should have ever gone back to that house. There was no need, a wife or no wife. There's no justification for the stuff he went through. So much so to the point that when we get to spoilers, I'm going to talk about a very crucial decision that I purposely made and it really kind of messes up how you play the game otherwise. But I really, really like the horror element of it. Like, as someone who's like, I get very scared very easily, and I think maybe I built up a tolerance to this game as I went on, and maybe we'll see if that carries over to other titles. I don't imagine so. I think the first half of the game does a really good job at not only scaring the player through like jump scares or like body horror, which is kind of the main sort of focus of like, because like people are getting their limbs chopped off left, right, center. I'm pretty sure there's a joke of like Ethan gets his hand chopped off more times than you actually die in the game. Like the thing is ridiculous how many times he gets his leg or his arm or whatever chopped off and he's still going. And he just like, you sent me that meme of him like just pouring water over his arm and it's just like automatically fine again. But it doesn't just do that, but it has a really good sort of horror ambience as well, where like you'll hear windows rattling, or you'll go into a room and you'll hear creaks. And even the weirdest thing of like the old granny who sits in the chair, like every time she pops up, I'm like, oh, she's gonna pop up now and like scare me or something. So that was always leaving me on edge. I felt like near the end of the game, it kind of just relied on jump scares to kind of scare the player. I don't think there was too much sort of horror elements going. It felt like more of a horde just being thrown at you. Like the whole element of Resident Evil, like at least for when anyone I talk to, it's all about, you know, resource management. There's sometimes you'll have to run by enemies because you don't have enough ammo to take them down, and it felt like near the end of the game that just didn't matter. Like you were kind of intended to just kill all the molded that were thrown at you. Because there were times where I found myself like, okay, I'm going to run by these guys. But then you get cornered off by another one, and then you'd be in this weird predicament where, since hitboxes, I think, in the game are so big, you can't just run, like, scoot by people. Like, you have to either take them head on or, like, have a huge open space. But my first impressions were very positive. I really enjoyed it. For it being a horror game, it definitely did scare me. And I think that's, you know, the main thing you'd want out of it, really.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the premise and the story, because you play as Ethan Winters, which is a new protagonist, new character to the Resident Evil franchise. It's completely new for this new first-person experience that they created. And your wife's been missing for, I think, 3 years?
Yeah.
Which is a long time. So your wife, Mia Winters, and then Ethan gets an email or a message from her and believes she's still alive, and so goes looking for her in Louisiana. And in some ways, it's playing off of kind of hillbilly horror, like kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. As you go into this kind of like swampy, kind of hillbilly home, which seems far too elaborate for just like a kind of family home. But I think my first impression, and because this was my first playthrough of it, that when this game came out, I think I watched a Let's Play of it. I think I didn't really play games anymore because I was kind of disillusioned at kind of the launch of that Xbox console, and I went over to PlayStation 4, and kind of because there was no Halo, it didn't keep me, so I kind of fell out of gaming for a little while. So this passed me by. But going into this, I was apprehensive because I didn't think I liked horror games anymore, because I loved Outlast when it came out. I was really looking forward to it. It absolutely paid off. Like, fantastic game. But I didn't know if I wanted to play another Outlast, because you don't have any weapons to fight back, and generally it's just hiding or walking around an enemy that's on a certain track to get to where you need to go, and ultimately that isn't that fun to me anymore. So I started this game thinking, yeah, it's gonna scare me. You know, I wasn't too fussed, and within the first hour, it's given me like really Evil Dead vibes. Like, if you know the Evil Dead films, yeah. Kind of like cabin in the woods, kind of dismemberment, and kind of really gory, slapsticky stuff. But the horror's really well done. I think there's good setups, and that you kind of find videotapes where you have to play the people inside them, and they set up the horror really well. And just walking around the environments, like this house that's obviously been just sitting for years, like all the food's like kind of decomposed and rotten, and it's disgusting. The sound design is superb, like just the creaks can just, you know, send shivers down your spine. The story isn't too elaborate. It's mostly about finding your wife and then finding a way to get out of there once you find out that there is this family who have been they are changed in a way, you know, corrupted, given sort of supernatural powers, and you spend most of the game running away from them. It's really hard to talk about this game because there's so much to get into. I think, you know, you start off and you're picking up kind of, it's that we've reviewed the medium, you know, you pick up the bolt cutters, use the bolt cutters somewhere else. That gives you an item to progress. You know, we all know that quite well. I think what this game does really well is it introduces combat. Even though the classic Resident Evil games did this, you know, you have combat as a solution. You have guns, but because the ammo is so scarce, you never want to use them, which is fantastic to feel like you never have enough ammo to deal with the situations you're in, which, you know, is really interesting. I find it like a fascinating gameplay setup in that you have combat. The combat is satisfying when you get it right, but you just do not have enough ammo to feel like you want to waste those bullets. And the combat, especially with that kind of camera wobble where Ethan walks, and, you know, a lot of people have said, and since going back to it, you know, I've put the camera wobble off. You put the aim acceleration off, because there's this really weird thing where you go to aim, and because the controller speeds up too much, your aim just is not good at all, and the enemies are really good at like kind of ducking and swaying out of the way of your gunshots, so it never feels like you're gonna hit with your bullets when you're trying to shoot the enemies. But yeah, so Odhrán, without going too much into spoilers, what did you think of the premise? What did you think of the setup and the story overall?
Yeah, so initially I really liked it. I really like the sort of the spooky part. I want to say, first of all, artistically the game looks really, really good. And that's obviously not just the Xbox Series X, because this doesn't have a like an enhanced version or whatever, and even with the capture card I'm using, I have to stick it at, I think I can only run it on the base settings anyways, so it looks fantastic. One of the things that really drew me to it, first of all, is I love there's almost like when you get out the car, there is very much an orange color palette just sprayed all over the thing, and that gives it this sort of dirty feel. Like, especially as you mentioned, like walking through this swamp area, and like when you see like some of the disgusting body horror stuff, like there's like, I think, strung up animals and whatnot, like you can imagine what the smell would be like because of the way it all looks. I think it just looks phenomenal. The premise of it, I really like the different sort of elements of the family, which I think is something that carries over into 8 from at least what I've seen. Like very much the sort of 4 people in a faction who are kind of part of different factions but all related. So like obviously the Bakers is the name of the family, but like the dad is obviously kind of maybe the in some ways they are kind of reminiscent of like the sort of people's traditional expectation of what a family would look like. So like the dad would be quite a physical torment or whatever, but the mum is very much like you know that she's kind of the boss of it, like, so she's kind of very much more tormenting in a sense, like even so much more in a sort of a physical ideal when you come to view her later in like one of the fights. And then Lucas is the only one that kind of, when we start to talk about spoilers in this episode, I want to come back to Lucas, because there's a couple of things I need to know, because you probably know a bit more about it than I do. But I find I found his character, or at least his sections in the game, the weakest. I think it's just because, and I want to mention this, you mentioned the tapes earlier, and I think the tapes are fantastic. Like, I dreaded playing those tapes because those are the scariest parts of the game. Because once Ethan gets a gun or whatever, like, that automatically halves the scare factor because you can fight back. Whereas when you go into the tapes, like, you're back to square zero, like, you've nothing. And particularly the first tape, the one where you're kind of with this these ghost hunter guys or whatever exploring like haunted house, like, that is really good. Like, that builds tension so well, and like, it, especially when you're starting out into the game and you don't know enough about the family or whatnot, it does a really good job at like selling how scary they really are. And then afterwards you'll go into sort of the basement area and you'll find like one of their skulls just pops up and like floating in the water, so it's like, oh, I know what that is now. And it adds like a good level of story depth to it. One though, there's a tape, and I'm not sure if you played it, it's the Happy Birthday tape. Yeah, I failed to see the reason for its inclusion, because you pretty much do the exact same thing like 5 seconds later with Ethan. The only change being that you actually make it out of the room as opposed to the survivor.
Well, but Ethan knows how to get out without dying because he's watched and played the tape.
Yeah, no, I get that, but you can... But I get that it makes sense from a narrative standpoint, but from a gameplay standpoint, like, if you're to go into that room, like, if you die once, like, you're going to know that, okay, this is not what I have to do. And so you're going to end up doing it again, but in a different way, and then eventually getting out. And that makes sense. That makes sense from a story way of doing it, that this is why narratively Ethan would get out. But when you're talking about keeping the player engaged and having them enjoy a game, having them do pretty much the same thing over again is kind of a bit tedious, because I went into that room after doing the tape and I thought, okay, I'll rip down this board on the wall and then I'll do everything else the same way, and then I'll be able to like kick down the wall or something. Because there's at times where it's like the stuff you wouldn't like. I want to mention that room for a second because I still don't understand. So obviously, for one of the puzzles, you have to take out something that's holding back oil from coming out of a barrel. I mean, the explosion off that cake is pretty big. I don't think the oil not coming out of the barrel is going to stop the oil from igniting. I think it just seems a bit... like, it seems a bit far-fetched. But then again, I am talking about Resident Evil, so like, I mean...
Wasn't it wine?
Was it wine? Because but then what is it that's igniting? I always assumed that was oil coming out the barrel, and that's why it spreads to the other areas of the room.
I just thought it was the alcohol.
Yeah, but that would be flammable as well, wouldn't it? But the same sort of logic I'm trying to get at applies here. Like, I feel like the explosion is big enough that it would affect that barrel. I feel like it's kind of it's a weak narrative point to say that, like, oh, because you didn't take out this brass plug, now you're fine. And I will say, gameplay wise, the one thing that annoyed me, and I talked about it a bit in detail in my final episode of the playthrough, is that if you die, you're going to have to watch the same cutscene over and over again. And it's really frustrating if you die like 2 or 3 times, because you're sitting there like, oh, I know what's happening here. And it made me think very clearly, actually, about a thing that Marty O'Donnell said when he was talking about Halo, where he was like, they'll never have you replay the same line of dialogue, because the player doesn't want to hear that again, because like they've already heard it and it'd be tedious and it would make the line feel a bit annoying. And I feel like, I don't know if 8 is the case that it does this as well, but it could be something that they could improve upon.
It might be in a few instances. I think that it's just one of those game design things where it takes a few savvy developers to go, actually this isn't fun for the player, we're going to have a few design philosophies. And you might see those in smaller teams, like perhaps Bungie started out as generally, I don't know. It is a game design thing I'd like to see implemented more widely. But yeah, would that naturally lead us on to talking about the gameplay itself?
Yeah, I'd say so. There's a few little bits I want to talk about anyways with it.
So, I really don't have too much of a problem with it. I think that finding objects, the developers obviously been very sneaky in like hiding like herbs behind planks and different things. Like low down, you have to like crouch and find things. And you know, there's that sense of creepiness as you're going about, and you know that Jack Baker, the father, is wandering around the room, and you know the amount of times that you're just running away, or you open a door and he's just there. It's amazing at making you feel like you turn around a corner or open a door and you could be, you know, if you look the wrong way, you're gonna like run into like a jump scare. So I love the exploration. I love the resource management. My criticisms really come down to, obviously, I've already mentioned it. They've tried to make the gunplay feel difficult, like, you know, you could miss every shot. And while it's a simple solution to turn the aim acceleration, and, you know, if the camera wobble makes you feel nauseous, you can turn that off as well. It feels a little bit cheap to design the game so that it's purposely hard to shoot your target. I mean, it's fine if the enemies are like ducking and weaving out of your way. But once I found out that turning the aim acceleration off is such a help to actually hit enemies on target, I just felt like, oh man, why didn't I know that in my first playthrough? I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those cases where if you were playing on PC, you'd probably have a much better time with it, because there's just so much. I think in general it's more difficult to aim on console than it is on PC anyways. I think that's kind of an age kind of, maybe it depends on the game, in fairness, but I think particularly with Resident Evil and in the way in which the aiming is focused in this, PC players have probably a distinct advantage in that case. One thing I want to tell you about the design philosophy, and I think it's kind of important because I feel like the developers knew that they kind of messed up a bit near the end, because as I was mentioning earlier, like obviously the core part of Resident Evil is to like resource management, save your stuff. You know, you feel like you can't shoot a bullet because that's a waste of something. And that's how the game plays out for like 50%. And then when you get to like midway through, and I'll just say the ship area, then that's kind of thrown out the window. And it's kind of like, okay, well, you've got bucket loads of ammo now. But then that leads to the player kind of becoming very, or I'm just talking personally here from this sense, but that leads to the player then kind of being really liberal with how they shoot, and not really taking into account resource management, which then again does a complete other flip then when you come near to the end of the game, because it's so difficult to find ammo come. Now I'm just going to say the very final boss fight. Now they knew that they messed up with how you manage resources, because if you die during like the first time I died in that fight was because I ran out of ammo, and the reason for that was because I had like, I think it was and the way I know that they messed up, that they knew people were going to die from that, was because when you die in that final boss fight, it gives you an option to go and check out your entire inventory management in your chest and bring stuff over with you to the final boss fight, which to me seems like they very much identified that this is a problem, that some people are not going to have the ammo there. So an easy solution for them was to then go, we'll just let them do whatever they want. So I feel like there was a mix of gameplay ideology they were trying to go for. Like, so there was obviously this very survival horror, resource management based level they were going for, and then it kind of shifts into action horror halfway through. And then it kind of takes a weird tonal shift back into it, not fully committing to the resource management again, but kind of in that sort of middle ground between both of them. So that's the only major problem I had with it. Obviously outside of the whole cutscene debacle stuff as well, but yeah, no, it led to me enjoying the first half of the game a lot, and then kind of near the end of the second half of the game, I was kind of just thinking like, I want this to end. Like,
I'll tell you what. Now that you've said the cutscene thing, I have just remembered pretty much all the cutscenes in Village you can skip.
Okay.
Like, you can pause and you can skip them. Like, that's wonderful, because when I went back to this game, because I thought, okay, I completed this game a couple of weeks ago now, I should check it out again for the podcast. I was like, click and pause. I was like, how can I not skip this? So yeah, perhaps they knew that and they thought, okay, let's just add a skip function. Fine. The other thing that I was going to say is that my experience is quite different to yours, because as you go through the game, I mean, the first 4 hours are very survival horror. Like, you do not have the resources to fight back. It's very intense. And then pretty much the second half of the game, Ethan starts to defeat more and more boss fights. And the boss fights, I think, are great. I think they're cinematic set pieces. I think they're really wonderful in the way, like, you can name like the garage boss fight, which is probably like the first one, and the way in which the boss and the player can interact with different things in the environment. I think that, and I mean, I don't think it'd be spoiling too much to say that, like, there's a car in the garage, and you can shoot the boss, and then you can try and get in the car if you have the car key. But you have to turn the ignition really quickly, otherwise you'll be pulled out the car. And then there's a chance that the boss can get inside the car and start running you over.
Yeah.
Like, some people don't know that can happen because of the way that they played it. And there are different ways that the boss fights can play out, which some people are just unaware of the different things that can happen because they can either happen or not. I think that's great game design. I think, when you've got possibilities for different things to happen, it makes your personal experience as a player feel unique. I think this game is like a fantastic 9-hour experience. And I'll get on to a little bit more about what I mean by that later. But the second half of the game, as Ethan becomes more powerful, he's obviously defeated a few of these enemies. So, like, obviously he's showing he's capable. You get more weapons. It becomes feeling like you're a bit more of a badass, like an 80s action hero. You've got more ammo. You're like gunning down different enemies, and the soundtrack really reflects that. And there's like a bit in the salt mines, which I've actually recommended that we use for a theme of the week on the channel, because there's like all the way through the game there's been like ambience and like ambient music and soundtrack playing, and then it's either like cellos or some sort of strings that kind of swell as you're fighting enemies. And like when that soundtrack kicks in, because it's largely been absent for the game, like it really, really worked well for me. And so in those moments when Ethan's fighting back and he takes the gun and he go, no, it's time up, I show him his boss and stuff, that's great. I really love that, because obviously I was expecting this to be a kind of Outlast, really intense horror thing where I'm going to be scared the whole way through, but to have that action in there, really, really loved it, really enjoyed it. But when it came to the final boss, and because we have been fighting bosses throughout the game, good boss fights as well, when it came to that final boss, I had loads of ammo, and I'm sort of confused by what you're talking about, because I know the final boss, there's like I don't want to spoil it, but basically for the final boss you do get a weapon given to you that you use, and I felt like I had so much ammo that I was ready for a final boss fight. I was like, okay, I've got all this ammunition, I'm gonna go into the final boss, and I'm gonna like absolutely shred them to bits with all this ammo, and it never came. Like, I was like, where's my final boss fight? And I've heard other people say that too. I mean, that's like my prevailing criticism, is like, I finally feel powerful, and it's just like, oh, but we can't give you that boss fight where you feel too powerful, so we're just going to end the game now. It's like so disappointing. I was like, no. But yeah, no, overall, I feel that this game, as a 9-hour experience, first half giving you absolute survival horror, second half giving you kind of more of that horror action that Resident Evil became kind of 4 onwards. I think that it was, I think for the time it must have been a really good tribute and homage to the Resident Evil series as a whole, to kind of incorporate the classic elements and get that survival horror so right, and then combine it with that action that it was known for later on, and it all plays smoothly. And obviously, as you've said, the RE engine is so fantastic. I mean, you can look at screenshots of Village, like everything's so detailed, and Village is now like the, you know, probably the best looking next gen game there is now. I think personally. And because I said it would be hard for me to not talk about Village in this episode, I am going to talk about it a little bit. Because where Resident Evil 7 is a 9-hour really good experience, like a cinematic linear experience, Village almost feels like, I mean, it's such a mashup of different games. It feels like a Doom crossed with Resident Evil with a bit of Bloodborne mixed in. If you've played Doom 3, it's kind of like that slow, you know, you're moving slow, and there's kind of, it's obviously in a horror environment, but, you know, you've got loads of weapons and you're defeating loads of enemies. It kind of does feel like that. It feels like they've leaned very much into action. I mean, there's a lot of good, like, scare moments in it, a lot of good horror experiences in it, but as a game, I think it's also one of the most replayable games that I've bought recently, because I finished it probably a week and a half ago, and I'm still playing it. Like, I'm playing the Mercenaries mode. I'm started a new game on the highest difficulty with my guns carried over, and it serves as a direct sequel to 7 as well, which makes 7 sort of, you have to play 7 in order to play Village to get the whole context and the narrative of Ethan, because it is like, it picks up 3 years after 7, and it's everything that happened in 7 directly influences what happens in Village, and everything is connected and tied together. So that's like my little bit of Village, and maybe you can come in and say what you've seen of Village as well. But I think this game was fantastic for taking the series in a new direction, starting with a new protagonist and a new style, obviously the first person, creating a very intense linear experience. But the fact that it, you know, breeding out of that a game like Village, which is so replayable, so action focused, and so it feels so fresh for the franchise, I think this game was like the creativity injected into the series that it needed. But if you want to talk about what you've seen from Village, or like a little bit more about 7, go ahead.
Yeah, I've tried my best to stay clear of Village because I actually genuinely want to play it firsthand. The only stuff I've seen of it is obviously all the thirst posting for Lady Dimitrescu, or I think that's how you say her name, is it? Dimitrescu, yeah. I've seen some like clips of it, and like when you're like fighting her or her daughters, and it's just so weirdly overtly sexualized that it's just like all the clips I've seen of like people playing, and it's like them running away and they're like, oh no, don't catch me, it's just like, and I think that's great. I think that's really funny, and I think it was really good marketing on their part to like really play into that. The other stuff I've seen on it was that weird like baby slug thing. I think I saw that thing. I don't know what the hell that's meant to be. And apparently there's meant to be, I think, who was the final one? The guy, you had him as your profile picture for a little bit. What's his name again?
Oh, well, there's like a werewolf guy called Urius. So when I first played the game, I thought he was the same as the human guy with like the big hammer, but he's not. Yeah.
But I think somebody mentioned to me that the most messed up scene in Village is in his section. I don't know if that rings any bells to you. I don't want you to say too much on it because I of course want to see it myself, but I think because the idea was that I think a lot of people were like, at least for me on the outside, and when I saw people first talking about the game, they were like, oh, he just looks like a normal dude, as opposed to like this like 9-foot tall vampire lady and this weird hunchback dude, and it's just like, oh, here's a guy who has a beard and wears a trench coat. But it's like, yeah, no, I can't wait to play it. This first sort of, it feels like one of those classic like as you mentioned, those like sort of like Doom. Like I go a step further and say it feels like something like out of a classic 90s, like something like Blood or Dusk or something like that. It feels like around that sort of indie polygon fast moving game vibe, but with the slow sort of moving of, as you mentioned, like Doom 3. And I think that really appeals to me because I love this sort of idea where you can have a campaign where you can go to 4 completely different like sort of ideas that it's sort of like a weird like it's a weird like Lovecraftian sort of like mesh of all these different things pushed together, and it feels like almost like they brought in like 4 different universes and they just happen to work together.
The genres of horror that they're traversing, like obviously you've got kind of vampires and werewolves, but that is such a limited like view of the game that I don't want to spoil anything at all. But the different tones and stuff that they're able to reach in that game is like fantastic. And obviously the baby slug thing is like very Silent Hill PT vibes. But yeah, no, go on.
There is also I want to mention, like I mentioned this when I first saw the game, but like the fact that it can have such an open linear setup and not have to hide it behind any loading screens, it really just shows how well they've been able to utilize the new consoles and, you know, beefier PCs and whatnot. I just think it's such a, like, it looks fantastic, and I feel sorry for anyone that doesn't get to experience it on like the newest hardware, because like I mean, I don't know, did this release on last gen consoles as well?
It did, yeah. I've heard people say there's a streamer I watch called Soul Signal who is a fantastic player. Like he's currently going through Resident Evil Village on hardcore with no damage. So every time he gets damage, he restarts from the last checkpoint, and he does it without taking any damage at all. And he's got like through the whole game like that. And I think he's about to do like a stream where he does the whole thing, no damage, no saves, which will be, you know, fantastic. But I think he's playing on PS5, and he said that he's seen people play not on PS5, and there's loading screens where there isn't on PS5. I've certainly been playing on Series X, and I haven't, you know, you mentioned loading screens, I haven't even really noticed any.
Yeah.
It's just the best next gen game I've played so far. It's my game of the year so far. I'm so impressed with it. I love it.
Yeah, because it's funny, in the last episode when we were talking about Outriders, we were like, nothing has really come out. And then in the space of like that episode and now, 2 huge games have come out, that being Resident Evil Village and now Mass Effect Legendary Edition. So it's like, for the last few months I have had nothing to play, and now I have too much to play. I mean, I'm certainly looking forward to it. It's the first time I have to say, and this kind of plays in with Mass Effect Legendary Edition as well. We mentioned, I think, in the Rapture Radio Rewind episode we did, that I don't usually pre-order games or buy them on launch because I genuinely don't know if I like them. And you were mentioning that you had pre-ordered Village because of 7 and what you'd seen of 8. And obviously there's a load of demos for Village as well, which is amazing. I can wholeheartedly say that I will 100% go out and buy Village now. Like I don't care if it's at full price or not. Like, I'm willing to pay it because I know that I'll enjoy the stuff they're going for, because like they've been so transparent with how they've done it, and like they've obviously given a load of demos. And I heard some people kind of like a bit disappointed that, because obviously the whole vampire stuff is like only a small section of the entire game. I think it's about 3 hours. And like from the promotional material, some people were led to believe that it would be like the whole game. But I love that it's only a small section, because it just shows that there's so much more that I have no idea about that I really want to look at. So I will definitely be going to pick that up. And I will probably lose hours of my sanity playing it, but you know, I'll enjoy it nonetheless. But yeah, no, I think maybe we're going a bit off track here, kind of gushing over 8.
We are. I do want to bring it back, because obviously I've talked about Village as being like this kind of a Doom shooter like experience with kind of survival horror elements of Resident Evil. One thing that really stands out is the enemy variety in Village is astounding. There is so many different enemies and so many different like with all like different weaknesses. So, you know, Halo has that thing of like, if you want to defeat this enemy, you're going to have to do this, and Village has that. And going back to 7, the enemy variety
it's just the molded, really, isn't it?
Yeah. You have these things called molded, which are basically like, they're not zombies, they're basically kind of creatures created from like black fungus, and they've got like claws. You've got like the standard ones who are kind of tall. You've got like the kind of short ones that crawl around and they jump. You've got kind of the bloated kind of boomer looking ones. Boomer as in Left 4 Dead, not in like the modern sense.
The old looking ones, Connor.
And I think, that was a high criticism of 7, that there's not much enemy variety. I'm sure there's people disappointed that there's no zombies, because Resident Evil was like, yes, it's viruses and mutations and body horror, but where's the zombies? Because there were zombies in the first one. Obviously, I understand that. Obviously, yes, there could be more enemy variety. I think the nice thing that 7 does is that it sort of highlights the Baker family as characters. Like, you fight all these molded, and there's insects as well. You fight them to kind of get to the boss fights or the Baker family who you're running away from. It really makes them stand out as characters. Like, they are kind of the main villains, and there's not much to detract from them and their personalities. I think that's what the kind of bland enemy does for them. And the enemies have a point. They are canon and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is so much to talk about with this game. I'm honestly struggling. Oh, that's a good thing about the gameplay. I've just remembered from watching your playthrough, which I will plug for you on Odhrán Johnson on YouTube. You can watch Odhrán's full playthrough of Resident Evil 7 if it sounds like you want to know a bit more of how it plays. And he's also playing Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which looks fantastic. But on your Resident Evil 7 playthrough, the one thing I was shouting at you was like, guard, block, because there's so many times where you're up against an enemy, and there is a mechanic where Ethan puts up his arms and that wouldn't do anything. If Jack Baker's got like a shovel, he can chop off your arms or like a chainsaw. Doing that is not going to do much. But the mechanic's there, and you will take significantly less damage when blocking. The problem is I don't think Capcom enforces it enough. I don't think they positively reinforce it. And I've heard people review Village and they say they've played the whole game on standard without ever having to block, which is mental for me, because I know the benefits from doing it. But because I've played both of them a lot, I know that if you block, you're going to take significantly less damage. To a new player, yes, there are times where it comes up on the screen like LB to guard, but you're not gonna notice that if you don't if you're not forced by the game to use it and you see the benefits. So most people, when they're playing through it, that first fight where you finally get a gun and you have to shoot an enemy down, I'm not going to spoil it, that fight can seem absurdly, insanely hard because you don't feel like you have enough ammo, and every time you get hit, a huge chunk of your health is taken away. And that's because new players, they don't know that the guarding is a mechanic. They don't know that they can get through the fight, taking significantly less damage. How did you feel? Was there a significant moment where it came to you, it was like, oh, I can do this thing?
I think it occurred to me, now I could have well missed that they put a prompt up or something, but I feel like, as you mentioned, it wasn't really enforced enough, so I kind of didn't really know what it was meant to do. I kind of just felt like your main bet was to kind of try and dodge out of the way of stuff by running away from them, which you kind of learned pretty quickly doesn't really matter, because Jack is a lot faster than Ethan, which is one complaint I have. This guy could be getting chased by 10 people and he just goes at a strolling pace away from them. There's no sense of urgency at all, especially when climbing stuff like ladders. He takes 10 hours to go up a ladder. But yeah, no, some of the mechanics I think could have been enforced a bit more. There's a whole section in the inventory for quick combinations of stuff, but I never used it because I just genuinely had no, I knew it was there, but it was never kind of brought up to me as a quicker option, because the only things I was ever making were standard health packs, strong health packs, or in some cases grenade rounds. I never used gunpowder once because I just thought it was a waste of chem fluid, because you come across it so sparingly in that game, whereas you could be having Like there was one point I think in the end of my playthrough where I had like 7 herbs and no chem fluid, and it was just these herbs stacked up in my inventory, and I felt like a botanist like walking around half the time. But yeah, no, with regards to, yeah, there's some mechanics that aren't really explained very well. I think for some cases as well, like I think for some of the boss fights as well, it kind of feels like, well, what am I meant to be shooting at here? Like there's some that are, I think we're okay to go into spoiler territory at this stage if you're okay with that.
Yeah, we'll go into spoilers. So if you're still listening and you haven't played the game, go see Odhrán's playthrough or get it yourself. It's only, if you've got Game Pass, give it a try, because honestly, I will say before we move on to spoilers, I do think that this is an atmospheric horror masterpiece. Honestly, I do think this game is a masterpiece as a linear one-time experience. But go on.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, like, for like specifically your second, I think it might be your second fight with Jack, where he comes back as the big blob, after you've just found Zoe and Mia, and it's like, okay, I can kind of see what I have to do here. I have to shoot the eyes on him because like they're a different color and they pulsate out and they look like weak points. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go for that. Now I have problems with that boss fight in itself because it just seems so tedious at times. But for like fights like the one against Marguerite, where she turns into the spider thing, you're like, do I shoot at, like, because she's obviously got this like sort of weird like nest thing on her as well, and like, do you shoot that? Is that the weak point, like, or does it matter? Like, because most of the time you're encouraged to shoot for the head because that's the most highest damage point on like the molded, and you're just like, do I shoot that? And then who else with the other boss fight? I mean, the final boss fight was a real disappointment because even though I didn't have enough ammo and I was kind of worried about how I'm going to juggle this, it just feels like you just shoot at the head for a while and then it's like, okay, now here comes the scripted cutscene, shoot again, and then like that's it. And one item I think that was really underutilized in the game was the flamethrower. It just seemed so useless half the time because I had the flamethrower at the final boss and I tried using it twice in the opening segment because I knew I wasn't going to be able to use it at range when I got outside. And I like, it did nothing, like there was no damage, so I just ended up using the machine gun and like the pistol to like use that at the beginning. It felt like such a waste of potential. And like the grenade launcher is really good. I think that's a really good addition. Like whenever you use that, it actually feels like it does impact. And the shotgun specifically I think will be everyone's favorite weapon because it like takes you like especially when you get it after just having the pistol, like it's such a step up. Because I remember, I don't know if you've seen it, but like, particularly when I first encountered the molded, when I went down to like the dissection room area, like when I just had the pistol, I was dying like every time. And then once I figured out the puzzle of how to get the shotgun, oh my god, I felt like a new man going down there. It was like it was like literally the game had just turned into, like I had become the like thing they should be scared of when I got that shotgun. Like one shot to the head, you're through. Like nothing, it doesn't matter. Like, and I thought I think that's really good. I liked this, like it had a really good slow level of like progression of where the player was getting more and more sort of capable of actually stopping the family. Until then, you get like, I feel like the machine gun is such a step back because it's quite useless, only for the fact that you can find ammo for it so easily. And the same goes for like the flamethrower as well. I think the flamethrower is useful for one thing, and that's clearing out like the bugs in that one section. And then after that, I didn't touch it ever again. Yeah, I don't know if you had any other sort of particular problems with the certain boss fights or whatnot, or the weapons even in general.
I don't think I had a huge problem with the boss fights. I found them quite enjoyable. Marguerite, she took forever to die for me, and I just shot her in the obviously infected area, which is kind of like her unmentionable region, just because body horror and kind of a lot of people have said Resident Evil 7 hasn't scared me, it's just grossed me out. It's just made me feel icky. Yeah. I'm trying to think. No, I mean, I was fine with the boss fights. I felt they were okay. Again, the end one, don't like it at all. But yeah, I have to agree. Like, shotguns are my favorite weapon. Like, in Doom, in Village, like, I'll just be using shotguns just because I love like the chunkiness of them. You know, you get up close to that, bam, yeah, love it. Favorite, apart from snipers. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have much criticism. I think if we're going to spoiler territory, there is a certain part of the story I do want to talk about, and that is the choice. I think you talked about this earlier. Now, like, I don't know what gets hold of developers that they think they can put in a choice where one of the choices that you can make does not make sense to the protagonist or the game and will give you a bad ending. Like, who does that? That's a terrible decision. But did you say you took the bad choice?
Well, I picked Zoe because at the time I was just like, if it wasn't for me, I wouldn't be here. So screw her. Like, so I don't think it was a particularly like I genuinely don't know what the other ending is to this game. Like the ending I have, like Mia dies, you get on the plane or the helicopter, sorry, and you like chuck your phone away and that's it. Like, and the one thing that made me so annoyed is that I never see Zoe again after that, besides the one cutscene with Jack, which I have to say, I really like that cutscene with Jack. I think it's so well done. Like, because it like adds so much depth to that character. Not even them, like, but also like Marguerite and Lucas is another one I want to talk about, because I don't think, like, from what I gathered from some of the reasoning, is Lucas even fully infected? Like, I just feel like he kind of like, he's already like a weird sadistic person that it doesn't affect him as much.
He is infected. Like his madness, he isn't himself. But he wasn't a great person to start out with, and like you see that if you play the End of Zoe DLC, where you play as Zoe as like the moment her family is infected and it all happens, and you get more context for the story. And there's a few files there that you read where Lucas is a bit of a creep. He's a bit of, you know, he doesn't seem as likable a person, but I think that when he is infected, you know, that is him infected. Yeah, I think that.
No,
go on.
Oh,
well, I mean, I was going to say that, you know, obviously, to have this infected family that you're fighting against and they seem completely evil, and then to actually see the people stuck inside and have them talk to you like we're not murderers. I think that's such a story beat that hit me, because I don't really care about Ethan in this game. Like, I don't care what happens to Ethan. I get that he's just supposed to be like a stand-in for the player. I don't care about Mia. There's nothing in this game that makes me care for Mia apart from that one time where I don't think you would have had this because you chose the bad ending. There's this one moment where she gives her life for Ethan, and I'm like, oh, that's so sweet. I'm, you know, I care for Mia now. But like the real characters you care about in this game turn out to be the family who are the victims of this biohazard.
Yeah.
This biological weapon. And it really makes you feel for them, and they stand out as great characters. And you know, there's no surprise that Jack Baker is a playable character in the Resident Evil Reverse multiplayer game coming out, because he's really been established, like Lady Dimitrescu in Village. You know, the villains, they've given like so much character and personality to them. You know, you just gotta love them. But go on with your point.
Yeah, the choice for me for Zoe was weird, because like you pick Zoe and then she gets on the boat with you, and then as soon as the boat is stopped, then you're automatically playing as Mia, which makes no sense. Because at first you think, okay, maybe it's a flashback, but then it's not a flashback, because then you have to go and save Ethan, who is on the boat. It's like, Mia wasn't with me. Like, this doesn't make any story sense for her to be here. And then with Mia dying as well, like, because in my playthrough, then you take control of Ethan and then you just kill Mia because she goes crazy because Evelyn sets her after you. And you end up having to like kill her with like a crowbar or something. But like for me, I had seen so many times where you literally melted down one of the characters and they just come back. So I was like, okay, Mia's not dead. Like, and then to just find out later she was dead, I was like, oh shit, like, all right. That's cool and all. And the only other time you see Zoe is in that cutscene with Jack, and she doesn't even say anything. Like halfway through that cutscene, she gets up and leaves, and it's just like, I just saved you. Like, have some respect. That is the same cutscene with the good ending as well. I don't know what happens at the good ending. Like, I want to.
The good ending, like you obviously, right, before I'll preface this with, obviously, if you're going to make a decision where you have the bad ending and the good ending, just take that decision out, because obviously it doesn't make canonical sense. We know Mia's in the next game in Village, so
Oh yeah, I'm glad you told me that, because I would have gone into Village and be like, I thought she was dead.
No, so and because when you play the game, you never see Zoe infected or change into like kind of evil dead monster like Mia does.
Yeah.
So you think obviously she's the one who probably has a higher rate of being saved. So yeah, there is some plausibility in that choice, and I had to look it up, and it's like I did look it up at that point because it's just like I don't want to pick the wrong thing. And they're like, oh, there's a bad ending and there's a good ending. Basically, if you pick the bad ending, your game's fucked up. Sorry for swearing. But basically, you pick Mia, you go off on the boat, Ethan gets captured, then as Mia, you play a flashback and then you come to present time and you fight to save Ethan, then you go back to Ethan and Mia like sacrifices herself for you, and then you go back and save her, and basically at the end Chris Redfield comes down and saves you. He's like the protagonist from the first Resident Evil game, and you're lifted up on the helicopter, and Mia's on a stretcher, and you know you've saved her, and job done as the hero. Yeah, it doesn't sound like your ending was that satisfying, to be honest.
Yeah, no, mine was just quite brutal, to be honest.
Yeah,
I mean, I had no idea
like
who Chris
Zoe
was either. It's just like, oh, Redfield. I was like, okay, should I know who this person is? And like, obviously, that's my fault for starting with 7. But like, still, it was just like there was nothing there other than like, okay, now I've survived. That's like that was it.
Yeah, no, it's such a strange decision.
Is Evelyn the old woman then?
Evelyn is the old woman. Like, if you read the files, like she was a young girl when she came to the Baker home, but because she's a biological weapon, through this weird kind of biological thing, she showed signs of aging really quickly. So when she's appearing as a young girl, you're actually like hallucinating because of the spores from the mold.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Because I actually genuinely, near the end, when at the final boss, I kind of felt bad for her then when you like administered the dose, because I was like, oh, this is kind of sad. I mean, that was completely robbed from me after I had to watch that cutscene 3 times, but like, still, like, it was, yeah, I don't know. I think you can physically see that I'm kind of getting a bit jaded of the game later on, just because there's so much repetition in like, go into this room, shoot these molded, go to the next room, scavenge for resources, and it's like takes out the horror element of it. So it's just, especially the mines, I don't really like that sequence at all.
Yeah, I've heard people say that they've got fatigue in like the second half, and it's not as good as the first half. I definitely agree that it's a less structured, less intense experience. It sort of becomes, it does maybe outstay its welcome a little bit.
Although the ship bit with Mia, where you're kind of navigating through the different floors, is really good. I really like that, because there's some good puzzle solving like material there. You know, you have to go the ladder up to the 4th floor, then you get the elevator, and you try and find all the different views and all this. So it's good. It makes for good like a good enjoyable story. Well, not story, but a good enjoyable playable segment. I don't know who that Alan guy is in that, because I think he means nothing to me. Like, so. I assume he's kind of important in other games. He's not at all, no.
No, I think he was just one of, because obviously him and Mia are like agents for some sort of organization that are looking after Evelyn. I don't think that he's important at all.
Yeah, well, like, because I was like, okay, he's out, and it's like, I thought we were going to get some explanation as to like, oh, why did he let her out? Like, how did this happen? But we never get that. It's just kind of like, oh no, she's out, and now there's somehow no other precautionary procedures in place for if this biological weapon gets loose on this ship. Also, I want to know, when I was on the boat with Zoe, like, when you go by the obvious huge freighter ship, you're just like, how did nobody else find this? Like, the size of it, like, it's just like, how did not even like, because obviously like the Umbrella Corporation come down at the end, like they obviously have good funding. Like, are you sure that they didn't like spot this beforehand? They were like, we should go sort this out. Like, but no, poor Ethan Winters, the dude who's like just gonna go see his wife, has to like do all the heavy lifting. Like, so it's just like, it's I think it very much, I don't know, it lost a lot of its soul for me kind of in the second half. I think bar like say the couple of cutscenes with Jack and like the final cutscene with Evelyn, I felt like I was really just kind of playing a semi-action game at that stage.
Yeah, I see what you mean. For me, I was still enjoying it up until the end. I do want to talk about the DLC really quickly, actually.
Okay.
I assume that because I got the gold edition, so there's like in the extras there's a few little mini games which they don't interest me that much, but there's like banned footage games where there's like let me think. There's one where you're in like a locked room scenario where you're like bedbound by Marguerite and you've got to like figure a way out of the room and you've got to like interact with all these different objects. And then if she hears like a noise, she'll come back and you have to put back everything as it was. Like, that is fantastic. I love that. Although it has like a really difficult to like do it first time or even third time. Like, you almost have to look up what you have to do. It's really frustrating starting that again, let me tell you. But really, really cool concept for that. There's like a game with Lucas of like 21 where you're pitted against someone and like if you lose you get your like fingers chopped off, and that like carries on and it's quite elaborate. That's a really fun little mini game. There are others as well. I can't believe I'm forgetting this. Oh yeah, no, it isn't the end of Zoe where you see the beginning with Evelyn. It's actually like the daughters, I think, tape. And you get to see like the Baker family get infected, and like that is fascinating. Like that's an awesome sequence. But again, in that sequence, there's a thing where there's the true path and like the untrue path where you've got to find Mia to get the true ending, and that it slightly annoys me. Although all you have to do is like look around more and find the exact things that you need to do. Like, it's like a puzzle to get the true ending, which is, I like that part of it, but making me play through something again to get a true ending, like, ultimately, like, I prefer it if that was like optional. But yeah, generally, and like the bigger DLC, let me just think. You've got like a DLC with Chris where you like go in guns blazing, like with an assault shotgun and stuff, and you like shooting up Molded, and you complete like Lucas's narrative because you don't really defeat Lucas in the main game. And then you've got the End of Zoe DLC, which wraps up the whole story by having Jack's brother come in and save Zoe from the Molded. Both of which are good. I think when I played them, because I played it straight after I finished Resident Evil 7, and I think that I probably felt a little bit fatigued. If you really love the game and you want to play the DLC, I'd say give it a week and then play the DLC, because it's more getting to play in that engine, in that world, and it rounds off the story. I think they're really good, but like they are not the tight experience that the mainline campaign is. But anyway, that is generally my thoughts on the DLC.
Yeah, I think we maybe want to finish up now. We're at the 1 hour and 10 minute mark here, so
fantastic. Well, that is, yeah. Anyway, so basically, if you want to play Village, go play Resident Evil 7, because that narrative will set you up for what I think is the best next-gen game out there. Obviously, great that we can have these things on Game Pass, because it gives you a preview of what Village is like, what it's like to play a Resident Evil game, and whether you'll like it. next episode we should be doing Mass Effect 1, which is on Game Pass, and obviously because the Legendary Edition is out, I might try and use my 10-hour trial of EA Play, if there is one, play a little bit and do a little comparison. Meanwhile, Odhrán is over on his YouTube playing through Mass Effect Legendary Edition, so give that a watch. But any final words from you,
Odhrán? I want to say that I think generally in every episode I always tend to focus on the negative stuff of a game, but I do want to quickly say that like this is like as someone who's a big fan of like indie horror games, this is what you would get if you gave an indie horror studio a full AAA budget, at least for the first half, I feel. So you're getting really, really good mechanical game mechanics and horror all meshed into one. So I would say give it a go anyways, even if you're kind of a bit skeptical about the final part. Like, at least play the beginning so you know what you're kind of, what you want to, at least you have an idea then of kind of if it's your thing or not. I would definitely recommend, this is definitely one I would say to download, because it's one of the better titles on Game Pass. It's up there, I think, with like top 10, top 20 games on Game Pass for me, so I would definitely give it a look.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But thank you for listening. If you want to check us out, we have a Discord. Check us out on Twitter, the Unofficial Game Pass Podcast. And we will see you next time for Mass Effect. So, thank you for listening. Goodbye.